Morning, everyone. Habari sa asubuhi. I think I got it right somehow. I wish to commend you, Your Excellency President Ruto, for your excellent leadership in convening this Africa Climate Summit, and for your dynamic and passionate leadership in spearheading Africa's first climate summit. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you for hosting us all in this beautiful nature-blessed country of Kenya. The African Development Bank is pleased to be a major sponsor of the Africa Climate Summit. The presence in such large numbers of Your Excellencies, heads of state and government, ministers and development partners from around the world says it all. Africa's voice on climate change will resonate across the world. The Africa Climate Summit will shape the future pathway of Africa's development. We gather because the people of Africa expect us to act. We gather because the future of the youth of Africa is at stake. We gather because we must galvanize global actions on climate. We gather because our collective existence is at risk. Climate change is short-changing Africa. Droughts and floods have been increasing across the continent. No country is spared. As we gather today, if we strain our ears enough, we will hear the calls of urgency from farmers whose crops and livestock are being destroyed, the voices of fishing folks whose catch is reducing and livelihoods are being imperiled, the voices of the young whose future is being compromised, the voices of women and children who bear the brunt of climate change, the voices of economies unable to cope with the ever-rising costs of climate-induced risks. We have a duty and responsibility to hear these voices and to act with a greater sense of urgency. And responding requires action at three levels. At the global level, the developed economies must meet their commitment to provide $100 billion annually in climate finance. The global climate financial architecture must be changed to prioritize the needs of Africa. At the national level, we must accelerate actions on climate adaptation. And that is why the African Development Bank has committed to providing $25 billion towards climate finance by 2025. We have also launched the African Adaptation Acceleration Program, together with the Global Center on Adaptation, the largest climate adaptation program in the world. Africa must develop with what it has, not what it does not have. Africa is blessed with large sources of renewable energy in the world. Renewables from solar, hydro, wind, and geothermal. But we cannot power Africa with potential. We must fully unlock Africa's renewable energy potential. That's why the African Development Bank is implementing a $20 billion Desert to Power program to harness the power of solar and deliver electricity for 250 million people. We must power every home, every school, every hospital, and provide stable, affordable, and reliable power. But we must, Your Excellencies, be pragmatic. Africa must use its natural gas and combine it with renewable resources. The International Energy Agency's analysis shows that doing so would only add 0.5% to global emissions. Give us space to grow. We must ensure that Africa's food and agricultural systems are climate resilient. The African Development Bank's flagship program, Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation, has provided 12 million farmers in 21 countries with climate-resilient agricultural technologies. In Ethiopia, climate-resilient wheat varieties supported by the bank has helped it to become self-sufficient in wheat in just 3 years. We are acting at scale to feed Africa with climate resilience. Under the leadership of President Macky Sall, as the then chairperson of the African Union, and the strong leadership of you, our heads of state and government, we succeeded with the Feed Africa Summit held in Dakar in January. We develop food and agriculture delivery compacts for African countries. We have mobilized, Your Excellency Presidents, heads of state and government globally, $72 billion to support African countries to implement these food and agricultural delivery compacts and to assure food security and food sovereignty within 5 years, and doing so with climate-resilient agricultural systems. I wish to recognize all developing partners from around the world and the African Union Commission who work so tirelessly with us to make this happen. Thank you very much. We will repeat this at the Africa Climate Summit with the development of climate change adaptation investment compacts to help channel financing to national climate adaptation action at scale. We must ensure that resources mobilized do not stay simply in government offices, but reach and protect the lives of people in our villages, in our towns, and in our cities. All lives must be protected from climate change. We must put the youth and women at the core of climate financing. That's why the African Development Bank and the Global Center on Adaptation are announcing here today the launch of a $1 billion facility for Youth Adapt program that will accelerate access to financing for the youth to tackle climate change. The youth are not just the future of Africa. The youth are the present of Africa. The African Development Bank is also rolling out the establishment of youth entrepreneurship investment banks, new financial institutions that will support and grow the businesses of the youth all across Africa. Finally, we must revalue, Your Excellencies, the wealth of Africa by accounting for the proper valuation of its abundant natural resources, including its vast forests that sequester carbon. Few may know that the Congo Forest Basin is the world's largest carbon lungs, larger than the Amazon forest. Yet, Africa's rich nature wealth and the global value of its carbon it sequesters for the world are not accounted for in the estimation of its GDP. It is not enough to praise Africa for its rich natural capital. Its GDP must take that into consideration. Africa's GDP must therefore be revalued based on its carbon sequestration and biodiversity, which provide global public goods. If this is done, the debt to adjusted GDP ratio of several African countries will be much lower, and they will have greater headroom to borrow more financing to support their development, including investing in the greening of their economies. We must, Your Excellencies, therefore, turn Africa's economies green, not because others ask us to do so, but because it is in our interest to do so. Africa must develop its own carbon markets, properly price its carbon, and turn its vast carbon sinks into new sources of enormous wealth. Africa cannot be nature rich and cash poor. As we look towards COP28, African needs must be front and center, powered by the leadership of our heads of state and government, our youth and the private sector, and the voices of our communities. We must be the vuvuzelas of climate financing for Africa. Together with partners from around the world, let's make it happen for Africa. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Gracias. Shukran. Asante sana.
Excellencies, our next speaker is His Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, the chairperson of the African Union Commission. Welcome, Your Excellency. A formidable global reputation of peacekeeping. We know you have.
Excellency Dr. William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, Excellency Azalia Soumani, President of the Union of the Comoros, and current Chairman of the African Union. Excellencies, Head of State, Government, and Delegation. Excellency Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General. Excellency Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Union Commission, representatives of international organizations, financial institutions, civil society, youth, women, honorable ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observers. First and foremost, I would like to thank President William Ruto, the government and the people of Kenya for the exceptional hospitality accorded to us since our arrival in this hospitable and green capital, Nairobi. The beautiful and natural environment in this country augurs well for the great success of our climate summit. The organization of this climate summit in such friendly conditions in just 6 months, thanks to the decision of the African Union Summit last February, is striking proof of the excellence of your leadership, dear friend William. I sincerely congratulate you. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, le récent rapport du groupe international d'experts sur les changements climatiques
on climate change, IPCC, confirms our fears. Africa is warming faster than the rest of the world. If this phenomenon is not stopped, climate change will continue to have a serious negative impact on the growth of the African economies. Agricultural productivity has been reduced by 34% between 1961, since 1961, due to climate change, more than any other region. Hence, it will have an unbearable pressure on the food systems in Africa. African countries thus face disproportionate burdens and risks arising from unpredictable weather patterns, particularly prolonged droughts and devastating floods at all levels. Massive humanitarian crises provoke detrimental impacts on economies, health, education, peace and security, and other related risks. For example, the season 2022-2023, about 18 million people have been affected by drought in the Horn of Africa alone. Recently, tropical cyclone Fred has affected more than 1.2 million of people and caused the death of more than 700 people. It is also estimated that between 2019 and 2023, the economic loss as a result of disasters in Africa is between 20 and 35.5 billion American dollars. This gloomy list is not exhaustive. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, climate change has spared no sector. It is to be recalled that Africa has around 400 million who do not have access to clean drinking water, and about 700 million do not have access to a very good sanitation. And this also indicates, experts indicate that there is a gap, a financing gap of 11 to 20 billion dollars. So we are obviously on the verge of seeing climate degradation. It is not the only factor, and it will be wrong not to integrate this in our global analysis of the negative factors, including governance, which is at the very center. I do not want to yield to pessimism. And in the general, it is, however, fortunate that in the table, we have some beacons and favorable indicators. I cannot help reminding that 600 million people do not have access to electricity, and 200 million of them do not have access to clean cooking and are exposed to all respiratory problems and diseases due to smoke. And because of climate change, we have problems in our infrastructure, and we need to develop profitable infrastructure and spend at least $160 billion per year. Indeed, it is encouraging to note that the African governments have devoted about 3.5% of their GDP to the development of infrastructure over the past 20 years. It is too little compared to some emerging countries. China and India, for example, devote 7.7 and 5.2% of their GDP, respectively, in infrastructure. We can thus see in which direction efforts have to be made. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this summit affords us an excellent opportunity to translate the climate ambitions of Africa into investment opportunities, to consolidate our voices on matters on burning issues of climate change, to prepare for the UN Climate Summit and for COP28 in the United Arab Emirates. At these meetings of global importance, Africa must, among other challenges, highlight the worrying and sometimes tragic situation in the Sahel, in the Horn of Africa, where drought and floods alternate, in the Congo River Basin, with dangerous deforestation and the disastrous consequences of cyclones in southern Africa and in the island states. It is urgent that Africa come to all these meetings with concrete proposals to be implemented without delay. I strongly reiterate my call to come to the next two meetings with precise proposals without drowning them in literature and the usual litany on the imperative need for collective justice for Africa, where responsibility is very limited in the pollution of the world, with an inversely proportional share of the volume of global investment in the field of environment. This call for a restoration of justice for Africa would benefit from being supported by a real reform of the global financial architecture, for which a high-level panel is rightly devoted at this summit. Obviously, this reform must resolutely focus on the financial organs and structures, institutions which structure the universe, which operate far from Africa. In this desired reform, a question comes to mind: the weight of the debt and the financing gap of the SDGs. Africa alone represented a need of $1.3 billion per year for sustainable development needs by 2030, while the financing needs for SDGs in the same period were $2.5 billion for financing developing countries. Everyone knows that the public debt stock in sub-Saharan Africa at the end of 2023 was estimated at $1.1 trillion out of 650 billion SDRs mobilized. Africa received only 33 billion, which is only 4.5%. In view of these staggering figures and many others, it is clear that there is no relevant global intervention in favor of Africa without a credible solution for the crippling debt challenge of Africa. To aid the struggle, which include financing adaptation, $100 billion per year, Africa has galvanized its will in its common position through a momentum unifying African voices, and it will be a central point of our agenda in G20 as soon as we join it. However, in this struggle, Africa cannot just be satisfied with incantation. Just like for its independence, it is a challenge to rely on its own personal efforts, on its own genius, the quality and its virtues of bold, imaginative, united and interdependent leadership. I wish you full success to our deliberations. I thank you very much. Asante sana.
Excellencies, we are overwhelmed by the support that we have received for the summit, and we want to listen to each and every one of us. So I would like to plead with Your Excellencies that we stick to the agreed 5 minutes so that we can have everybody speaking to this. Next, Excellencies, out of COP27 in Egypt was the establishment of a loss and damage fund and the finalization of the details to implement the Santiago network. It was also the first time food security was recognized in the COP conversations. The Arab Republic of Egypt was a COP27 presidency, and it is my honor now to invite His Excellency Mustafa Madbouli, the Prime Minister of Egypt. Welcome, Your Excellency.
Au nom de Dieu le tout, Clément le tout, miséricordieux, président du Kenya, distingués invités, distingués présidents, mesdames et messieurs, je veux tout d'abord vous transmettre les salutations de son Excellence le président Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, président de la République arabe d'Égypte. Il m'est un grand privilège de participer au nom de l'Égypte à cette réunion de haut niveau et je félicite son Excellence président Ruto et Kenya qui a voulu bien abriter cette réunion qui survient après le succès de la réunion de la COP 27. Mesdames et messieurs, ce sommet d'aujourd'hui survient à un moment critique de notre monde et en particulier le continent africain qui témoigne de la fréquence du changement climatique avec les vagues de sécheresse dans le Sahel et les feux et incendies et les ouragans au sud du continent et l'élévation de la température, l'élévation du niveau de la mer et de l'océan et l'élévation des températures au nord de l'Afrique. Et ceci aggrave les pressions sur nos communautés et nos pays africains. C'est pour cela que l'Égypte, à partir de son engagement pour contribuer aux efforts pour faire face au changement climatique, s'est efforcée pour avoir des résultats au cours de la conférence du Sharm el-Sheikh pour passer à l'application à travers l'accélération, la mise en place des projets et pour répondre aux besoins des pays en développement et renforcer les efforts internationaux pour passer aux économies vertes à basse émissions. L'Égypte, en tant que président de la conférence, que Sharm el-Sheikh soit un point de départ pour répondre aux attentes des pays africains pour faire face aux défis du changement climatique. Dans ce même contexte, notre conférence survient pour confirmer notre notre détermination à passer vers l'économie verte et à recevoir le soutien technique et financier et les investissements, ce qui permettrait de bien d'explorer toutes les richesses de nos continents, non pas uniquement dans l'investissement et le financement des projets de résilience, mais également à présenter certains financements pour faire face aux dégâts et pertes. Et je confirme le rôle qu'entreprend le comité des présidents africains et le comité des conférences, le comité des ministres de l'environnement africain pour faire face au changement climatique et ses répercussions néfastes. Mesdames et messieurs, le fait de s'élargir dans les ressources renouvelables sont au sein du modèle de développement et c'est ce qui a été bien félicité par les pays au cours des CDN et notre continent est riche par des exemples qui ont pris l'Égypte qui est arrivée à réaliser 20% de la production de l'énergie des sources renouvelables, mais nous aspirons à atteindre 40% dans ce cadre. J'aimerais bien confirmer la vision des Émirats arabes unis à travers M. Sultan El Gaber pour passer à l'énergie renouvelable. C'est une vision.
Access to finance is the bottleneck that faces Africa and developing countries to turn its dreams and plans to reality, to contribute in solving the climate issue. And meanwhile, that doesn't touch the path of development or have more burden and of debts. This is a great opportunity to deal with the financing of climate, and the Egyptian vision in this respect it has to do with the following. First, we need to reconsider the available financing instruments and to move to concessional financing and grants to accelerate the transition required. Second, we need to reconsider the capital flow to ensure that Africa should get its fair quota of financing. We need to emphasize that financing climate is an additional and a new kind of financing, and it does not take a piece of the development financing. We need to activate an active and good mechanism to use the current and existing debts to turn those debts into financing climate. In this regard, we're looking forward that Dubai meeting would be a breakthrough in the pledges of advanced countries to provide an annual amount of $100 million for climate. It is a symbolic pledge because we do have a historic responsibility. In conclusion, I'd like to re-emphasize that the nature of climate change and dealing with can only be through cooperation based on enhancing a multilateral system, based on equity and justice, bearing into consideration the specificity of each country. And I'd also emphasize what Kenya proposed as a vision to draft and to formulate our discussions in this meeting, and re-emphasize that Egypt, as head of the current session of the UN climate meeting in Dubai, the COP28, and we believe its support to build up on the outcomes of Sharm el-Sheikh and to have more outcomes. We fully support them in their efforts. Thank you very much.
Excellencies, Africa is Europe's closest neighbor and our sister continent. Our geopolitics therefore concern each other. Europe and Africa have close economic, cultural, and geographical ties. To speak for the European Commission, I would now take this opportunity to invite Her Excellency Ursula von der Leyen, the European Union President. Welcome, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, dear President Ruto, for hosting this Africa Climate Summit. And thank you very much for your leadership on climate action ever since you took office. I very much welcome Kenya's Climate Change Act 2023 that was launched during this summit and that puts strong emphasis on carbon markets. We fully support you on this important topic. Presidents, Prime Ministers, fellow leaders, excellencies, I want to greet my colleague Moussa Faki, Chairman of the African Union. I want to greet the President Assoumani from the Comoros. I want to greet Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Dr. Sultan Al Jaber, President of the COP28, my fellow leaders, ladies and gentlemen. I am deeply honored to participate in this discussion. This summit is a crucial step to prepare the upcoming COP28 meeting and to make sure that Africa's voice resonates around the world and that Africa's priorities as a continent that is most affected by climate change are duly taken on board. Today, I'm here not only to listen to you, but also to bring Europe's offer to be your ally at COP28 and to work together on all issues on the agenda. Because however different our two continents may look, we share the same interests when it comes to climate action. We hear you, President Ruto, and dear friends, when you say that Africa's first priority is to grow your economy, yes, and lift as many people as possible out of poverty. Yes, you're so right. Climate action is part of the solution. You are part of the solution. With your huge potential for renewable energy and clean hydrogen, your critical raw materials, your incredible nature and biodiversity, and your young workforce. You can help clean up global energy systems and supply chains while creating good jobs here and economic opportunities yet that your people demand, rightly so. This is a win-win partnership which benefits Africa and the world. For instance, the benefits of expanding Africa's clean energy sector would be massive. By speeding up the transition to solar and wind power, energy sector jobs in Africa could double in a few years. And Africa could produce enough clean energy not only to power up your continent, but also to export abroad. Climate action can be one of the main drivers of Africa's growth. But for this, Africa needs massive investment. And Europe wants to be your partner, in closing this investment gap. First of all, we fully support the need for multilateral development bank reform. It is time to move from words to action, absolutely. Secondly, investment has to come. And this is why 150 billion euro in our investment plan are designated for Africa. We call it Global Gateway. They are aimed at the African continent. Global Gateway supports investments ranging from hydropower plants in the DRC, Burundi, Rwanda, and Tanzania, to the 1 billion euro initiative on climate adaptation and resilience in Africa, which we announced at COP27. And Global Gateway is unique in the global investment landscape. We're not only interested in extracting resources. We want to partner with you to create local value chains, to create good jobs here in Africa. We want to share European technology with you. We want to invest in skills for local workers. This is crucial for the young people, because the stronger you are as suppliers, the more Europe will diversify supply chains towards Africa, and the more we both will de-risk our economies. It's a clear win-win. Namibia, for instance, is now building a new hydrogen industry, as well as rare materials value chains in partnership with Europe. And later this morning, President Ruto and I will conclude a new hydrogen partnership between Kenya and the European Union, with the objective to further develop the green hydrogen economy, and with the full support of Team Europe. This is good news for Africa and for Europe alike. So we should work very closely as partner. Yet, public money from major economies, however crucial, is not enough. And this is why we need to bring the conversation on climate financing to the global stage at COP28. Let me briefly share 3 specific points that will be discussed here in Nairobi to pave the way towards COP28. First, on attracting private investment to Africa. Second, on carbon pricing and carbon credits. And third, on setting global targets for the energy transition. On the first point, the green transition will require an unprecedented scale of private investment. Public finance will not suffice. This is true for Europe, but it is also true for emerging market and developing economies. Private capital will need to be mobilized at scale. And here, green bonds are widely recognized as providing part of the solution. This is why we just put forward a new proposal to attract private investment. It's called Global Green Bonds Initiative. We know that emerging economies can face hurdles to access capital markets, but we can change that together. Europe has the biggest and most advanced green bond market in the world, so we are ready to share our expertise with your teams on how to develop your own green bond markets, and at the same time, we will push on the investor side. Together with the European Investment Bank and our member states, we are allocating €1 billion to de-risk private investments in emerging markets. This could help to attract up to €20 billion in sustainable investment. So, let's work together on that to build and grow Africa's green bond markets, and let us bring together this crucial point to COP28. There's another solution that would unlock huge resources for climate action in Africa, and that is carbon pricing and true carbon credits. And this is my second point. I believe, as you do, President Ruto, that setting a price on carbon emissions is one of the most efficient and one of the most effective tools in our hands, because it fosters innovation by the private sector, that's crucial, because it makes heavy polluters pay a fair price, that is necessary, and because it creates revenues that can support the clean transition in developing countries. That's what we need. And this includes also to include the carbon sinks that have been mentioned, and you are rich in carbon sinks here, and to reward this contribution. We have to get there. We will discuss this in more detail in the next session, so let us work together to bring a proposal for global carbon pricing and true carbon credits at COP28. And finally, on global energy goals, If we are to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, we have to speed up the global energy transition. That means if we want to match our goals, we need to triple renewable energy capacity, and we need to double energy efficiency by 2030. This sounds bold, but it is doable. If we step up global investment in renewables, this would make clean energy more affordable for all countries, including here in Africa. And this is why COP28 President Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber and I champion an initiative for global targets for the energy transition to be achieved collectively. Because only what gets measured gets done. So, the global goals will provide a benchmark to track the progress and to attract even more private investment. So, I look forward to working with you on this and much, much more. I hope that Africa and Europe will join forces to reach a global agreement at COP28. Ladies and gentlemen, these three proposals may look bold. They may look impossible to achieve. But in the beautiful words of Nelson Mandela, who said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." We have a huge responsibility to fight climate change for the good of our children, for the good of our grandchildren. And I wrote down these beautiful words of the African youth yesterday. Our countries are burning and drowning. As you're not here to save us, we have to trust you now. So, my friends, let's reward the trust of these young people and show responsibility. Let's join forces for COP28. Many thanks. I feel so honored for being invited. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Excellencies, the Nairobi African Leaders Declaration on Climate Change and Call to Action, which we hope that we will get from you, Excellencies, tomorrow, will take a tour of the United Nations Secretary-General Summit, then eventually to the UAE for COP28. What better way to start preparing the way for the declaration than by having the COP28 President-designate, Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber, the COP28 President-designate, to address this summit. Dr. Al-Jaber is the Minister of Industry and Advanced Technology of the United Arab Emirates. Welcome, Your Excellency.
President Ruto, Secretary General Guterres, Your Excellencies, Heads of States, Your Excellencies, Heads of Governments, Your Excellencies, distinguished ministers, honored guests, colleagues, and dear friends. It is indeed my pleasure to be back here in Nairobi and to have the opportunity to share with you my thoughts at this inaugural Africa Climate Summit, where Africa is evidently championing a new vision for climate action. We're gathering here in Nairobi just 3 days before the UNFCCC releases the findings of the first global stocktake. And let's just face it, we already know that the world is way off track, and we know what this report will actually say and what it will conclude. The world is losing the race to secure the goals of the Paris Agreement. And the world is struggling to keep 1.5 within reach. Collectively, we must admit that we are not delivering the results we need in the time we need them. We must also accept that business as usual is simply not working, and that business as usual will not allow for a paradigm shift. We need a smart, pragmatic disruption. We need an integrated approach that delivers transformational progress. And we need a plan that leaves no one behind. That is why I have been and I continue on calling on all parties to unite around a plan of action that is fully inclusive, a plan of action that fast-tracks a just, responsible, orderly, and well-managed energy transition, a plan that will focus on people, lives, and livelihoods, and a plan that will finally fix climate finance. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa contributes just 3% of global emissions. Yet, we all know that it suffers some of the worst consequences. Droughts, floods, and failed harvests have exposed 1/5 of Africa's people to hunger, tripled the number of people displaced in the last 3 years, and is dragging down Africa's GDP growth by at least 5% every year. But there is also another narrative that unfortunately is overlooked and in a big way undermined and underestimated, and that needs to get out there. And that is Africa is also a beacon of hope, filled with potential and a global example of what pro-climate and nature-positive development should and must look like. Ethiopia's Green Legacy Initiative is enhancing food security and stimulating green jobs across the Horn of Africa. The countries of the Congo Basin are protecting vital rainforests and helping preserve the world's natural carbon sinks. Kenya is closing on its goal of 100% clean energy by 2030. And the number of sub-Saharan countries in Africa with significant installed solar power has grown 6 times in the last 5 years. This great continent is rich in the resources that can help not just Africa, but the entire world transition to a zero carbon and high growth future. That said, we first need to deal with some realities, and we must accept to come to terms with these facts. Almost half of Africa's population still have no access to electricity. Almost 1 billion people lack clean cooking fuels, and this energy gap will only increase as Africa's population grows. These basic energy needs must be met, and meeting them with low-carbon, nature-positive solutions will meet Africa's development and climate goals at the same time. And the key to making this happen is, of course, finance, and finance, and finance. This finance must be made available. This must be made accessible, and this finance must be made affordable. According to the African Development Bank, $250 billion annually is required to meet Africa's climate finance needs. Africa only receives 12% of that amount, and less than 2% of that is going to adaptation. We can all agree that this is neither just or equitable. We must agree that it is a big missed opportunity. The World Bank estimates that every dollar spent on climate adaptation brings an average of $4 in benefits. It simply makes sense for Africa to get a fairer share of global climate finance. That is why I am calling on donor countries to close out the $100 billion pledge they made over a decade ago and to replenish the Green Climate Fund. I will continue to press on these issues. I am also calling on donors to double adaptation finance by 2025 and for all parties to transform the global goal on adaptation from theory and text into real action and tangible results. We also need early pledges for the Loss and Damage Fund to help vulnerable countries recover from severe climate impacts that they already are exploring and experiencing. What was promised in Sharm el-Sheikh must be delivered in Dubai. We can no longer accept pledges and announcements without clear roadmaps of implementation. In parallel, we must upgrade our financial architecture. We need a complete upgrade. In fact, we need a surgical intervention of the global financial architecture that was built for a completely different era. IFIs and MDBs must step up, and they must up their game. They need to raise concessional capital and lower debt burdens. They need to attract and leverage private capital at a multiple, and the multilateral, public, and private sectors need to mesh together and work as true partners to accelerate the delivery of practical solutions and real impactful projects on the ground. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the United Arab Emirates has applied this model of genuine partnership to invest in clean energy projects in 70 countries around the world. We have always chosen to meet global challenges by building bridges and working with like-minded partners on solutions in the pursuit of progress and sustainable development. That is why I am pleased to answer the call made by African leaders to seize the opportunity of green growth. And today, it is my true honor to announce a new initiative between the United Arab Emirates and Africa that aims to unlock Africa's capacity for sustainable prosperity. Your Excellencies, the Abu Dhabi Fund for Development, Etihad Credit Insurance, Masdar, the Abu Dhabi Future Energy Company, and EMEA Power will join with Africa 50 as a strategic partner under the guidance of the UAE and African leadership to develop 15 gigawatt of clean power by 2030. Working together, we will deploy, and by working together, we will deploy $4.5 billion that will catalyze at least an additional $12.5 billion from multilateral public and private sources. It is our ambition that this will launch a new transformative partnership to jumpstart a pipeline of bankable clean energy projects in this very important continent. This initiative will target countries with clear transition plans, robust regulatory frameworks, and a real commitment to putting the necessary grid infrastructure in place. It will clearly demonstrate the commercial case for clean energy investments across this very important continent. This initiative is designed to work with Africa and for Africa. It will act as a scalable model that can and should be replicated. And it will support COP28's global goal of tripling renewable energy by 2030. And here, let me take the opportunity to thank His Excellency, the President of Kenya, and his government, and the African Union Commission and the EU Presidency for championing this goal alongside COP28. It's through their leadership that they are choosing a path that makes economic and climate sense at the same time. And let me extend an open invitation to all Africa's leaders to join us at COP28 to help mark a new, ambitious era for Africa's sustainable growth. Ladies and gentlemen, as COP28 approaches, I am determined that it is a turning point that delivers for everyone, everywhere. We don't want to leave anyone behind. Climate change is a global fight, and it demands a global solution. If Africa loses, we all lose. And if Africa succeeds, we all succeed. Progress for one is progress for all. Let's unite, act, and deliver to turn the rhetoric into real results. Let's turn pledges into tangible projects on the ground. And let's launch a new and optimistic future that puts the world on a climate-positive pathway and offers an opportunity for all to prosper. I thank you all, and I look forward to receiving you at COP28. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Excellencies, the Nairobi Declaration, like I indicated, will find itself to the UN General Assembly, and we are happy to have with us the UN Secretary General, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, who is both a politician and a diplomat who will guide the discussions and midwife the contents of our declaration to find itself into UN resolutions. Welcome, Your Excellency.
Dear President William Ruto, thank you very much for your initiative, your enthusiasm, and your leadership that brought us together. Asante sana. Excellencies, friends, an injustice burns at the heart of the climate crisis, and its flame is scorching hopes and possibilities here in Africa. This continent accounts for less than 4% of global emissions, yet it suffers some of the worst effects of rising global temperatures. Extreme heat, ferocious floods, and tens of thousands dead from devastating droughts. The blow inflicted on development is all around, with growing hunger and displacement, shattered infrastructure, systems stretched to the limit, all aggravated by climate chaos not of your making. It is still possible to avoid the worst effects of climate change, but only with a quantum leap in climate action. The people of Africa and people everywhere need action to respond to deadly climate extremes. First, we need far greater climate ambition, with countries hitting fast forward and massively accelerating action to limit temperature rises and impacts. And the largest emitters must lead the charge, in line with my Climate Solidarity Pact and acceleration agenda. And here, from a low-emitting continent, Africa, I make a very strong appeal to the large emitters, to the G20 countries, responsible for 80% of the emissions that will be meeting this week in Delhi. Assume your responsibilities. Developed countries must commit to reaching net zero emissions as close as possible to 2040, and large emerging economies as close as possible to 2050, with support from developed countries to do so. And it's time to break our addiction to fossil fuels and invest in a just and equitable transition. We need to see credible plans to exit coal by 2030 for OECD countries and by 2040 for the rest of the world. And we need ambitious renewable energy goals in line with 1.5-degree limit. And we must bring affordable electricity to everyone on Earth, and particularly in Africa, while simultaneously reaching net zero electricity by 2035 in developed countries and 2040 elsewhere. Second, reaching these targets requires climate justice. Developed countries must present a clear and credible roadmap to double adaptation finance by 2025 as a first step towards devoting at least half of all climate finance to adaptation. And they must also keep their promise to provide $100 billion a year to developing countries for climate support and fully replenish the Green Climate Fund. And all countries must also operationalize the Loss and Damage Fund proposed at COP28 this year. Every person on Earth must be covered by an early warning system by 2027 by implementing the action plan we launched last year. And 6 out of every 10 Africans currently lack access to these systems. The Early Warning for All Africa Action Plan, launched yesterday under the leadership of the African Union, will be critical to addressing this need. And more broadly, we need a course correction in the global financial system so that it supports accelerated climate action in the context of sustainable development. And we can't achieve one without the other. And this means an international financial system that is able to provide an effective debt relief mechanism that supports payment suspensions, longer lending terms, lower rates. And it means recapitalizing and changing the business model of multilateral development banks so they can massively leverage private finance at affordable rates to help developing countries build truly sustainable economies. The global financial system must be reformed to be an ally of developing countries as they turbocharge the just and equitable green transition that leaves no one behind. Which brings me to my third point, making Africa a world leader in renewable energy and green growth. This continent is rich in renewable energy potential. Africa is home to 30% of the mineral reserves that are critical to renewable and low-carbon technologies like solar power, electric vehicles, and battery storage. Of course, we must not repeat the mistakes of the past. To truly benefit all Africans, the production and trade of these critical minerals must be sustainable, transparent, and just across every link of the supply chain, with maximum added value produced within African countries. African leadership is also helping to generate innovative green economies anchored in renewable power. From the greater Horn of Africa, where over 85% of electricity generation comes from renewables, including massive hydropower projects in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Sudan, to wind and solar projects in Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco, to Mozambique, which gets nearly 100% of its energy from green and sustainable sources, to the increased installation of large-scale solar projects, including in South Sudan. At the same time, Africa is home to 60% of the world's best solar resources, but only 2% of global investments in renewable energy over the last 2 decades. Now is the time to bring together African countries with developed countries, financial institutions, and technological companies to create a true African renewable energy alliance. With adequate access to financial resources at reasonable cost and technological support, renewables could dramatically boost economies, grow new industries, create jobs, and drive development, including by reaching the over 600 million Africans living without access to power. Renewable energy could be the African miracle, but we must make it happen. We must all work together for Africa to become a renewable energy superpower. Excellencies, friends, just as the injustice of climate change burns fiercely here in Africa, so do the opportunities. I'm convinced that Africa can be at the heart of a renewable future. The summit and the solutions being discussed here represent a big step forward, but our countries must not be alone in this journey. At the end of this month, I will hold, on the way to COP28, a Climate Ambition Summit to summon the world's attention and committed action to climate change and the need to support developing countries as they transition to a renewable future. Ambition in mitigation must be in parallel with ambition in climate justice. Now is the time for all countries to stand as one in defense of our only home. Let's deliver the climate justice that Africans, the world and the planet we share demand and deserve. Asante sana.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Excellencies, it is the African Union Summit in February that approved the co-hosting of this summit by Kenya and the AU Commission. And to speak to us next on his aspirations for the summit, let us welcome His Excellency President Azali Assoumani, President of the Comoros and the Chairperson of the African Union. Welcome, Your
Monsieur Ahmed Abako, Dr. William Ruto, Président de la République de Kenya, Monsieur Antonio Guterres, Secretary General,
Your Excellency Guterres, General Secretary of UN, Mr. Faki, President of Commission of AU, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, ladies and gentlemen, heads of international organizations, and distinguished guests. All protocols observed. Salam alaikum wa barakatuh. At this time, all the eyes are on us, the African continent, united here to discuss at the highest level, thinking on the issue of climate. For this, we think that we are going to succeed here in this beautiful capital city of Nairobi to come up with a new impulse to the dynamics in order to fight against the effects of climate change in our planet village. This is an opportunity for me, first of all, to thank and sincerely thank our brother Ahmed Abako, William Ruto, for his commitment for sustainable and harmonious development. I would also like to thank the people and the government of Kenya for brotherly reception that we enjoyed since we are right here in this beautiful country, and for the hospitality that we enjoy here in Nairobi. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, when we see what our planet has been undergoing, we have seen devastating effect on our societies, on our economies, on our ecosystem, on our diversity in general. According to the intergovernmental experts working on climate, the world temperature is increasing. It has been increasing since 1990, and we cannot say that this is negligence, but it is the fact that we are not taking into account on this problem, and also the weak action in order to fight this effect. Therefore, we need to intensify our actions because of the effects which are dramatic on our continent. Even if we are only responsible for only less than 4% for greenhouse emission, the island states like the Comoro Union, we are experiencing this, and we are not well equipped in order to fight all this. Despite all these challenges, Africa should go ahead and carry out its ambitions as written in policies and strategies at the national and regional level, and also from the contribution at the national level. Therefore, the organization of this summit on climate in this beautiful country has come at the right time so that we can come up with a conventional approach between the countries of the north and the countries of the south by highlighting the shared responsibility through dialogue in order to come up with solutions that are shared. For this, Africa should make profit from this organization so that we can come up with innovative, inclusive, and sustainable solutions by us and for us, and also define the collaboration for concrete climate action on this planet. Ladies and gentlemen, honorable participants, the continent is impacted by negative natural impacts. For example, Comoros, we undergo almost every year a lot of damages and losses from the earthquake, tropical cyclones, and earthquakes, and we lose every year almost $5.7 million. My country, we have carried out programs in order to do the adaptation and mitigation of energy. Energy is an important potential by using renewable energy, air energy, photovoltaic energy, in order to produce electricity and reduce the use of firewood in homes and industries. And for our plan of 2030 that we have adopted, our ambition is to make Comoros by 2030 a resilient country to the shocks on all dimensions of sustainable development. As far as adaptation is concerned, for Comoros and other African countries, agriculture sector has been impacted by COVID and the war in Ukraine. That's why it is very important, because we have seen the repercussion of this, and aggravated by the food crisis that we have experienced. we have been experiencing on the continent. Therefore, we have to take the opportunity of this summit so that we can identify the actions that we can put in place in order to come up with a food system that is sustainable and resilient in order to guarantee our means of subsistence, and this should be sustainable. We should privilege social actions, innovation, and resilience, and come up with sustainable agriculture methods, protecting our natural resources, our health, and our climate. Protection of our resources, air and water resources should be also at the center of our concern. That is why the Moroni Declaration from the Ministerial Conference on Blue Economy and Climate Conference in Africa. This was organized in collaboration with the African Union Commission and UNSCA and the International Commission for Nature and the Indian Commission. They highlighted the work of climate and recognizing the role of seas and oceans in adaptation and mitigation. For this, we call upon the island states of Africa in the negotiations by highlighting their geographical specificity and their vulnerability from extreme events and different environment crises that we've been experiencing. We call upon for the support in order to have sustainable blue economy, generating employment, and come up with new partnership through reinforcing cooperation of partnership and collaboration. We suggest in this case that the financial aid should be increased. $86 billion given to Africa is very weak in order to support the current costs. We plead again to come up with mechanisms of funding because of damages and losses, coming up with facilities for all the vulnerable African countries, especially the island countries which are developing. It's also important for us Africans to think about the need to own the modern technologies specializing in surveilling climates in order to alert in time our people when extreme events are about to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, to summarize, I can say that the world threat of climate change and the effect of environment is going to exacerbate the complex nature of the world, which affects women and youth in a disproportionate manner. I would like to say that the Declaration of Nairobi will certainly express our African solidarity, to speak with one voice, to express our African specificities. I am confident that we'll come with the true solutions to the big continental and world challenges that we will also defend at the COP28 that will take place in Republic Arab Emirates. And they need our support through the personal commitment of its president, Sheikh Nahdet Al-Narian, through innovative technology in order to fight effectively against climate change. Asante sana. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Excellencies, now to cap for us this opening session is the chairperson of the Committee of African Heads of State and Government on Climate Change, and also the President of the Republic of Kenya, His Excellency William Samoei Ruto. Welcome, Your Excellency.
Your Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, distinguished participants, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to Kenya. This African moment is a global moment where climate action is actually green growth. I am delighted to be here with you for a number of reasons. First, I am excited to participate in this summit as a scientist who has done some research on ecological impacts of human activity on fragile and precious ecosystems, including rivers and wetlands. I am also privileged to be leading the Kenyan delegation to the Africa Climate Summit. And besides, I have the honor for the time being of serving the young green continent of the future as the chair of CAHOST, the Committee of African Heads of State on Climate Change. And for hosting this event with my good brothers from the AU. And I dare say this conversation is happening in the right city, where the UN has the global environmental capital, where we have UNEP. I am therefore highly encouraged by your strong response for our invitation to attend and participate in this inaugural transformative Continental Assembly convened to focus on climate action from the standpoint of generating African solutions to global challenges. The participation in the numerous events that make up this summit has so far demonstrated impressive commitment, extraordinary enthusiasm, exemplary motivation, and unparalleled determination to confront the problems, clarify issues, engage inclusively, and define a unique strategy platform for the implementation of bold interventions to catalyze progress in the global climate action agenda. I welcome you to Nairobi, our burgeoning and sleepless green city in the sun that is bounded by a national wildlife park and a close canopy of indigenous forest. In between, our capital pulsates with the restless energy of community, enterprise, industry, innovation, learning, fun, and adventure. Please feel at home and find time to enjoy the sights and sounds of our city and country. And when I say welcome home, it's both figuratively, but also in reality. I did say yesterday, I did inform the participants yesterday that Kenya, where you are sitting, a few kilometers from where you are sitting, has been discovered the earliest remains of man on Earth. And it means that before you guys went all over the place in Africa, Europe, and America, and the rest of the world, we all began from here. And therefore, it is correct for me to tell you, welcome home. And while you are away, These are the greetings, just so that you find your way around. Jambo is the greetings. Maybe, and when somebody else tells you Jambo, you reply Jambo. It's simple. Jambo. Good. I will take you one more step. When you want to say, how are you? You say Mambo. Simple. And then the reply is Boa. Okay, let's go. Mambo. Good. There you go. So I'm sure you'll find your way around with that. Africa is a very young continent. Our median age is 19. Africa's youthfulness is precisely the attribute that has inspired African leaders to imagine a future where Africa finally steps into the stage as an economic and industrial power, an effective and positive actor on a global arena. I am very proud because of this realization, and it has motivated Africa's leaders to create meaningful opportunities for young people to participate in, contribute to, and take charge of consequential endeavors in many sectors. This bold policy is already transforming the strategic landscape of climate action and is swiftly propelling our continent to a focal point of global sustainability agenda. On Sunday, at the Youth Summit, we saw for ourselves the immensity of the potential that we can unleash simply by facilitating positive youth action at all levels in every sector. Potential and opportunity are both futuristic propositions. The African Climate Summit has been designed to enable us locate our intense engagements and the most energized discourse in order to facilitate imaginative, problem-solving, and innovative interventions that are bold enough to meet the critical challenges of the present and future times. This is why potential, opportunity, the future, and youth are recurrent themes that underlie our interactions in this summit. We have convened here to consult, deliberate, and collaborate in imagining and designing the future of climate action globally and its implications for African aspirations to achieve shared prosperity within one generation. This summit is dedicated exclusively to the transformation of potential into opportunity, the conversion of ideas into actions, and the turning of plans into results. It is about creating a firm consensus, designing effective strategies, securing commitments, and forging transformative partnerships that will drive climate action in the direction and at the rate required to pull our continent and planet back from the brink of a climate disaster. The urgency of this moment is informed by the knowledge that climate change is the greatest challenge, not only to the well-being of humanity, but to every existence of life on Earth, and that only urgent and coordinated action on a global scale can stop the impending catastrophe by lowering greenhouse gas emissions and reducing their concentration in the atmosphere. This is an immense and formidable challenge, even at the best of times. However, the time we are in, and in which we must implement this urgent and daunting undertaking, is a complicated and difficult time for nations throughout the world. Regional conflict with geopolitical ramifications have compounded the disruptive impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic to throw global supply chains into disarray, slowing down economies, raising the cost of living, suppressing economic growth, and straining food systems to a breaking point. The complex interplay of these circumstances also combine with other localized vulnerabilities to drive adversity in many communities, placing intense pressure on governments to reconfigure resources, allocation, and other strategic interventions. In short, it would be understandable if African leaders prioritized other commitments and relegated climate action to an afterthought. This is why I proudly celebrate the courage and imagination with which the people of Africa and their leaders have converged with extraordinary focus and commitment on the climate agenda, not as an additional or peripheral concern for public policy, but as the foremost priority and the defining intervention in our collective journey to shared prosperity. As a result, patient consultation, thorough debate, determined collaboration, and bold confrontation of facts in issue, it has become clear to us at the Africa Union, under the aegis of the Committee of African Heads of State on Climate Change, that tackling climate change also produces the solutions for the complex interconnected crisis that we face today. This is what this summit is designed to underscore. Collectively, we hold the power to transform the current continental and global trajectory. More critically, we all have an urgent responsibility to do so with a sense of collective purpose that matches the sense of urgency demonstrated by Africa's young people at the Youth Summit earlier this week. Although we are gathered here to explore the means by which we can unite in action for the greater good, we have taken full account of the fact that we are not all at the same place in terms of our experiences with climate change. All countries struggle to achieve socio-economic progress under various constraints. Due to a range of complex and interconnected historical, political, and economic factors, African countries struggle with unique, inordinate, and incredibly complex structural drawbacks in the quest to provide opportunities for their peoples to achieve prosperity. Nevertheless, we have all, in our different ways, succeeded in making progress over the years amid these extraordinary difficulties. The tragedy of climate change is that it is relentlessly eating away at this progress. And going by evidence based on scientific projections, its appetite to consume our GDP will grow in years to come. We are already losing between 5 and 15% of our GDP growth every year to the adverse impacts of climate change. At the same time, the cost of adaptation continues to rise along with the cost of living, while the cost of development capital for African countries remains prohibitive, as millions of our youth remain unemployed. Only rapid and inclusive transformation, powered by robust industrialization, can place us firmly on a path towards sustainable resolution of these challenges. A sound understanding of the nature and causes of climate change, coupled with our experience of its devastating effects, has provided us with a robust early warning system that the classical economic development progression precedent is not available for us as a pathway to this transformation. As Africans, we are strongly persuaded that not only is it urgent for us to execute an audacious leapfrogging of the traditional developmental pathway to industrialization, but urgent ecological imperatives also dictate that we must go green first before industrializing, and not vice versa, like the advanced industrial economies had the luxury to do. I emphasize this point to underscore the principle underlying Africa's position on climate action agenda and the foundation of our strategic, institutional, and policy direction. We have an unprecedented opportunity to abandon the well-trodden yet unsustainable path of the past and forge a new route that aligns economic inclusion and shared prosperity with climate commitment imperatives. Africa's low rate of greenhouse gas emissions must not relegate us to the margins and footnotes of the global climate agenda. Africa must step forward as the cornerstone around which effective climate solutions are built. Yesterday, I encouraged participants in this summit to disregard the grievance standpoint and instead consider climate action imperative through an opportunity lens. As soon as we do that, a nexus of feasible sequences begins to emerge in an unbroken continuum from potential to opportunity, and through investments and technological innovation into green manufacturing and industrialization, including shared prosperity. Our untapped renewable energy potential, together with the world's youngest population of skilled, motivated, and knowledgeable industrial men and women, along with Africa's abundant endowment of natural assets from carbon sinks to arable land and mineral wealth, confer on us the indispensable fundamentals to swiftly become a cost-competitive industrial hub with ample capacity to decarbonize global manufacturing and green the economies of our continent, our neighborhoods, and the globe. It is good for us to be open about the need to confront a couple of basic truths. First, it is demonstrably clear that none of the world's industrialized nations will be able to achieve their net zero goals within the time indicated by scientists to avert further warming. Secondly, unlocking Africa's potential to undertake economic transformation along a green trajectory is the most feasible, just, and efficient way to attain a net zero world by 2050. With those two combined, Africa's capacity to limit its own emissions is the clearest pathway to enable the world to achieve its climate action targets. Africa's opportunity is a global opportunity and a chance for humanity to redeem its intergenerational legacy. Scientific experts have consistently demonstrated, from analyzing available evidence and making projections, that these can be achieved while generating jobs in their millions, creating enormous investment opportunities, and catalyzing unprecedented economic growth. Under a proper green growth paradigm, climate action also serves as a robust engine for poverty reduction, employment and wealth creation, and economic transformation. By definition, effective climate action must entail technological leapfrogging to disrupt and invent the industrial development pathway and go green fast. It must also involve effective decarbonization of global production and supply chains and deliberate efforts to remove carbon from the atmosphere at scale. Understood this way, green growth aligns perfectly with opportunity-oriented perspectives of climate change, which presents Africa with its most important means of achieving stability, prosperity, and development beyond middle-income industrial status. To achieve green growth, we in Africa have committed to move with speed and under various effective frameworks to develop the necessary instruments, institutions, policies, and strategies through which we shall design and implement incentives that will accelerate the delivery of priority actions. We shall also support our youth, especially those in enterprise, to enable innovation and deliver localized solutions for the benefit of our communities, and at the same time attract other African and international investors to finance climate action. Every step of this journey will require partnership that facilitate collaboration and multilateral collective action to achieve just development financing mechanisms, deliver equitable access to markets for Africa's green products and services, and a just regime that provides liquidity, debt relief, and affordable investment capital everywhere on the continent at scale. We are all connected to our common humanity and a shared stake in the vitality and livability of our planet. We are also bound firmly by the fact that Earth is all we have, that we have no other home, and that no alternative planet to resort to when things burn. Global warming cannot be mitigated by air conditioning our little pockets and corners of the world. Prosperity cannot and must not be pursued in a zero-sum, exclusive fashion, because the resulting injustice and inequality are the drivers of inequity, poverty, conflict, and activities that threaten biodiversity and encourage pollution. We are all interconnected. That is a statement of fact. And this existential moment provides us with a unique opportunity to reconnect with our shared humanity. In this summit, you will have heard and will continue to learn more about the bold, transformative, innovative fruits of partnerships, cooperation, and collaboration that are already underway in various parts of Africa. I invite you to pay close attention to as many of these cases as possible, and assure you that you will be surprised, challenged, and inspired by the many wonderful demonstrations of bold initiatives in the face of many opportunities. That is the essence of this summit. It is an orientation, and in fact an orientation run designed to familiarize us with our journey into the future, driven by African solutions, powered by African resources, and anchored on African opportunities. The collaboration I have in mind must be bold in ambition, broad in scope for their vision, deep in terms of diversity of their stakeholders, and long in terms of their geographical reach. An impressive example that I have had opportunity to interact with is the Global Center for Adaptation, an organization based in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, whose constitution is an appealing emblem of our aspiration, from the aspirational design of its global headquarters and futuristic regional headquarters in Nairobi, comprising green walls and roofs, as well as rain gardens, to the collaborative culture of its staff. Unsurprisingly, the center is intended to inspire the world to thrive with nature instead of pursuing the dangerous course of seeking to thrive at the expense of nature. The center spearheads the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, a focal point collaboration with the University of Nairobi, Africa Development Bank, and the Africa Union Commission as part of the continent's response to the climate crisis. I am delighted to announce that as an outcome of this summit today, Kenya will host the GCA Africa headquarters here in Nairobi. Ladies and gentlemen, it has taken tremendous courage, effort, and determination to leave behind us the old continent that was historically profiled with intense negativity. The Africa whose people neither are there to be seen or heard has summoned the confidence and readiness to confront hard facts, engage truthfully, and forge a common position on critical issues that project a new, bold, radically transformative voice into the global discourse. And let me say here that we have discussed potential. And it is true, we need to have a conversation about Africa's potential. Why? Because we have been profiled negatively. The continent of disease, war, poverty. But we are stepping forward to say, look here, Africa is the continent with 60% of the world's renewable energy assets. Whether you talk about wind, whether you talk about solar, geothermal, hydropower. Number two, we're saying Africa is the continent that has 40% of the world's critical minerals for energy transition. Whether you talk about nickel, cobalt, lithium, manganese, this is where those reserves are. Number three, this is the continent, the youngest continent with a median age of 19. 25% of the world's population will be living in this continent by 2050. We will have 40% of the world's workforce by 2100. This is the continent number 4 that has 2/3 of the world's uncultivated arable land that can transform through smart agriculture into the store, the production store of the world. And number 5, this is the continent that is the lungs of the world. We have the largest natural carbon sequestration infrastructure. In fact, we dare say, if there was a company for collecting garbage globally, and I'm talking about carbon garbage, Africa would have the largest shares because we have the largest lungs. The only problem is that those who produce the garbage refuse to pay their bills and profile the company as broke, when it is actually them who have refused to pay the bills. So that is our continent. It's a continent of tremendous potential. And that is why Chinua Achebe told us that until the lion learned the art of writing, all stories glorified the hunter. I think we have learned to write. I think we have learned the art of writing. And that is why we are going to write our own narrative. That is the continent that we belong to. Let me also say another thing, opportunity. Yes, this climate crisis, climate change, and the climate crisis that comes with it, yes, it is true, we contributed the least. Yes, it is also true, we are suffering the most. But in this crisis is Africa's opportunity. And that is what we want to focus on, Africa's opportunity to unlock the tremendous resources that we have for green energy transition. And we must exploit this opportunity. And number three, so that I conclude, is that this is the continent that has the highest investment potential. We are only limited by two things. Number one, we are limited, as I said earlier in my statement, by high interest rates for development capital. Many of our countries, and we are here and they say figures don't lie, 9 countries are already in debt distress in our continent, over the cliff. 13 countries are classified as high risk, and another 17 countries are classified as moderate risk. And the biggest contributor to debt distress in our continent is high interest rates. We pay 5 times more than others, meaning that in fact the architecture is set up in a manner that if you borrow, it will be difficult for you to pay. And that is why we need a conversation, and a very candid conversation, and we are saying this in all honesty, around how do we get concessional funding? How do we pay as much as others are paying? How do we get Africa away from paying 5 times more? And I asked in this gathering, we're not asking to be favored. We're not asking to be treated differently. We want a fair financial system that treats everybody equally. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not too much to ask. A fair international financial architecture is not a fair proposition or an unfair proposition to make. Number two, many of our countries are headed into debt distress because of climate change. Let's be honest. We are suffering the most, whether it is in the Sahel with drought, whether it is in the Horn of Africa with drought, whether it is in South Africa and the southern part of our continent with cyclones. And we are saying the suffering is across the globe, but we carry the biggest brunt. I'll contextualize this. And because of climate change, we are forced to divert resources that are meant for economic growth into dealing with the effects of climate change. I will contextualize this. In Kenya, we lost 2.5 million heads of livestock in northern part of Kenya. Combined with Ethiopia and Somalia and Djibouti, we lost 9.5 million heads of livestock. So what did I have to do in Kenya? So in Kenya, I've had to increase resources meant for school feeding from 1.5 million children in school, under school feeding. We've had to scale up this year to 4 million kids in school to be put under school feeding, and we've had to rearrange the budget to provide for that. So when we say climate change is destroying our economies, we are not making statements. We are making statements of fact. And that is what is driving many of our economies in that direction. And let me contextualize this further. When I was first elected as a member of parliament in a rural constituency in Kenya, I represented a community that is so proud that they think debt is not a good thing. They are risk averse and very debt averse. So, to try and encourage the community that time, then there was this phrase, and I want to say it in the indigenous community. There was a phrase that Kaigai Kobarin Besen Kosir Kobarin Panan. I will explain to you what that means. There is Besen and there is Panan. Besen is debt. Panan is poverty. So it is said in this community, if you must die, it is better to die of debt than to die of poverty. Because you are dying anyway. So it's... And so, to contextualize that into this debate, we don't want to die in this continent, we don't want to die of debt, but we also don't want to die of poverty. That is why we must have a conversation around multilateral development banks and concessional financing and how we can finance our economies using resources that do not punish us. And when we make this proposition, we have tremendous respect for our multilateral development banks. They are doing their best. We have the best of respect for them. But we believe they can do better. We believe that there is an opportunity. We need to explore the SDR, Special Drawing Rights window. And this time round, we want to have that window when it's made available because it is possible. Let those who need the resources get, not those who don't. In the last experience, those who did not need the resources got more than those who needed the resources. We need to have a paradigm shift this time round. And number two, we believe that it is possible to expand concessional financing through leveraging on the balance sheets of these institutions. And finally, to be able to unlock the resources that we need to be able to drive these new investment and financing opportunities, especially for green energy. We believe it is time to have a conversation about carbon tax. I said we need to have a conversation about carbon tax. And I mean we need to have a conversation about carbon tax. Yes. We believe it is the only way, it is among the ways that we can raise additional and adequate resources for us to finance our development. And while we are thinking about financing, for us in Africa, 3 things are very important. As they say in Kenya, mambo ni matatu. Number 1, speed. It takes inordinate to access any meaningful resources. Number 2, it requires scale, because we've all agreed that enormous resources are required. And number 3, affordability, so that we all pay the same. And that is why this event is both Africa's climate summit and a global pre-COP28 convention. Africa is meeting and Africans are talking. The world is listening. We must use this opportunity to lead the world in a new direction towards a future that holds immense promise for both Africa and the entire world. The many initiatives showcased at this summit testify to the courage of African enterprise and innovators to pursue breakthroughs, exploit opportunities, develop models, and take risks to make our tomorrow better than our today. When the global stocktake is released, there will be another opportunity to test our courage and resolve by asking each other hard questions in the spirit of fashioning the new way to achieve rapid improvements. We have therefore committed to conclude this summit with a declaration which will firmly encourage everyone to keep their promises, even in hard times, as a matter of justice, to hold each other to account, to collaborate, and to innovate. This African moment is a global moment. We are in word and deed full stakeholders in this global journey and its primary navigators at this stage. I urge everyone at this summit to exercise bold leadership and contribute to our efforts to reconfigure global markets and international institutions around African aspirations and strategic goals. I call on each one of you to do their part so that the potential that lies in our continent can deliver opportunities for Africa's youth, communities, enterprises, and nations to actualize a future for all of us. It is a matter of long-standing African wisdom that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go with others. We have a long way to go and no time to lose. In this moment of existential urgency of whole humanity, I dare say that we have our ancestors' permission to innovate a way not only to go fast, but also go together, provided we consult thoroughly, engage in good faith, collaborate effectively, and proceed inclusively. This is an emergency, and we must undertake climate action and green growth with this understanding. I thank you. God bless you. God bless Africa. Asante sana.
Your Excellency, you have some tasks to perform, so please come back to the stage.
I have been requested to ask the climate envoy from America, who is scheduled to take a flight to take a few moments and come and speak to us. My good brother John Kerry is somewhere in this audience. Welcome, because he also has a declaration to make and an announcement to make. Welcome, John.
Mr. President, distinguished presidents, Your Excellencies, fellow ministers, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, I have a feeling that after that extraordinarily powerful presentation by President Ruto, nobody should say anything. We should just act. Maybe I should start by just saying jumbo. Works. Mr. President, thank you for convening everybody here. Over the years, I've been privileged, Mr. Secretary General, like you. We've been at many of these conferences, and the words come easily. The actions seem to have been more difficult over time. It's a great honor for me to be able to be here representing President Biden at this very important summit. And I want you to know, as I listened, and as you listened, I could feel this room. Something is happening. This is different. I feel that. This is different. I think, Mr. President, I would just say to you, your leadership is palpable. We feel it. And in what you have said today, there is such a clear path ahead for all of us. Africa is meeting. Africa is speaking. Africa is deciding. And nothing could make a greater difference, I think, on a global basis, given what you just heard from the President about the remarkable resources that are here in Africa, about the young people who are thirsty, hungry for a future. And so Africa and this moment offer an enormous opportunity. This problem that we are facing is human-made. It's about pollution. It's not very complicated. It doesn't take a rocket scientist or a mathematician or equation work to its end in order to understand what's happening. Humanity is threatened by humanity, by the decisions that we are unwilling, it seems, to make. So, at this moment, I believe it is clear that Africa presents some of the greatest opportunity in the world. To do what? To win this battle about how we heat our homes, drive our vehicles, light our factories and our homes. This is about fundamental production of energy. And if we will make the right choices about that, the future is different for everybody. That's what's so attractive and important about what President Ruto was saying. You want to have a cleaner life? You want to have a healthier life? Less cancer? Eliminate 8 million people dying every single year because of the lack of quality air that we breathe? All of that comes from the unabated burning of fossil fuel. And it is challenging, if not threatening, our very planet that we all live on. So, 20 countries produce 80% of all the emissions. Mine is one of them. 20 countries. And it is critical for all of those 20 countries to immediately take steps to get on the path to the Paris Agreement, to align, to have the ability to keep 1.5 degrees alive. That will only happen if those 20 countries take the lead and make it happen. The crisis now is also, if justice is to mean anything, it certainly has to mean that if there's going to be a transition, everybody has to be able to share in the benefits of that transition. And right now, it is clear that you can't talk about a just transition, when some people, there's no transition at all, or when some people, there is acute, unfair debt that swallows and drowns the choices that those countries have to make. My friends, adaptation, which wasn't on the front burner in the early years that we've been working at this, but it is now, and it should be, for the simple reason that without adequate adaptation, we don't make it. That's the predicament that we've created for ourselves for where we are now. So adaptation is critical, and the damage Mother Nature is telling us on a weekly, daily basis. Every 18 days, we have a $1 billion climate event somewhere on this planet. So adaptation is critical. President Biden has now launched a program called PREPARE, the President's Emergency Program for Adaptation. And he has committed that we are going to help at least 500 million people in developing countries, especially in Africa, to be able to adapt to the worst impacts of this crisis. He has committed the United States to work alongside African nations to lead the way in adapting to and managing the impacts of the climate crisis. And as part of PREPARE, he is providing, or will fight with the Congress and guarantee that we will provide $3 billion annually for adaptation for the $12 billion program that he believes is essential in order to be able to do our part to adapt to this challenge. It is why we are working with partners on the Transitional Committee this year to design an effective fund to help vulnerable developing countries respond to loss and damage. And it is why last year in Sharm el-Sheikh, the President decided that the United States needed to try to accelerate that process, and we joined with our friends in Europe and elsewhere to say that no, it's not adequate to do that over a 2-year period. We need to close out and understand where we're going with the Loss and Damage Fund in 1 year, this year, when we all meet in Dubai. So in addition, as part of implementing PREPARE, I'm pleased to announce today also we're going to provide an additional $30 million for climate-resilient food security efforts across Africa. First, $20 million to the Africa Adaptation Initiative for the Food Security Accelerator, and that will invest in agricultural businesses and help them create their own independent climate-resilient supply chains. Second, $10 million will go to the Climate Resilient Adaptation Finance and Technology Transfer Facility to scale technologies so that we can advance adaptation efforts like cold chain storage, which would help maintain the quality and the safety of food from the farm all the way to the homes of people in the world. We've learned that adaptation saves lives, creates jobs, and obviously it's just plain old common sense. Roads and bridges that are built today can only spur growth and curb poverty if they're still standing tomorrow. So in many ways, we have learned Africa suffers to a great degree the worst impacts of the climate crisis. And it is essential that every country step up to help other nations, and particularly Africa at this point, in order to be able to adapt to the climate impacts. But at the same time, we also have to continue to mitigate, and I think you all understand that. Of the 20 most impacted countries in the world, 17 are in Africa. That tells the story. We all have a moral obligation. The rest of the world, and particularly the developed world, the world that has those 20 countries with the biggest economies, we have a fundamental imperative for all of us to get this job done. Ladies and gentlemen, I am personally convinced we are going to get to a low-carbon, no-carbon economy. I see incredible things happening around the world. With the IRA in the U.S., we are breaking new ground on battery storage, on new technologies for wind turbines that will get 30, 40 megawatts of power from one turbine, new technologies for accelerating the transition with hydrogen and so forth. All of the things that President Ruto talked about. The vision that your president has put forward today is not just a vision for Africa, it's a vision for the world. And President Ruto is showing a path for everybody to follow, and I hope everybody will feel impacted by what he has said here. One of the great philosophers, I just close by sharing this with you, one of the great philosophers of the Enlightenment, when people decided that they would listen to science and not be browbeaten into somehow believing that everything was the sort of result of a vengeful God punishing people for their sins. But people decided and understood certain scientific facts make a difference. And they're real. And that has guided us for the centuries since then. Those pathfinders helped us to understand how to break ground and build a world in which we can have vaccines and deal with new technologies and go to the moon and so forth. We can win this battle, but we only win it if we make some fundamental decisions. Immanuel Kant, one of the great philosophers of that time, wrote, "Science is organized knowledge. Wisdom is organized life." Well, right now, if you look around you at the life we all lead all around this planet, science and the knowledge are unequivocal. All that is left for us is to summon the wisdom to organize the world to do what we know we have to do. That's the vision that I heard from President Ruto, and that is the vision that I'm convinced will come out of this week of great effort at this summit, which can help to prepare for a groundbreaking COP at which we do the job people are asking us to do. Thank you very much.
Excellencies, we are moving on to a very important session where we will be listening to each and every one of you as you make your national statements. But a few minutes before that, I want to usher in Zain to, and Your Excellency, President William Ruto, to undertake a signing ceremony here, and then we move on to the national statements. Thank you, Excellencies.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. This is a very significant moment in the Africa Climate Summit. We are going to start this green revolution together and launch right now Kenya's green hydrogen strategy. I would like to request our leaders to step forward and sign off this important strategy. I'd like to invite Thomas Ostros, the Vice President of the European Investment Bank, Dr. Barbel Koffler, Parliamentary State Secretary of Germany, Her Excellency Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, and His Excellency William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya. Please do come onto the stage. We have a symbol here on the stage that will be representing this agreement. And so we're going to ask all four of our leaders here to take one of the pens that you'll be given and sign this very important moment. And just for context, as we get set up over there, Over 93% of Kenya's electricity comes from renewable energy sources, with a drive to reach 100% by 2030. I would like to invite also on the stage European Union ministers to come and stand behind our party here, as well as Mr. Davis Chirchir, Cabinet Secretary for Energy and Petroleum, and we can take a group photo of this extremely important moment as we launch Kenya's green hydrogen strategy. Green hydrogen plays a very central role in Kenya's green energy transformation. I mean, it really is going to offer a very significant potential to produce local green fertilizer and drive emissions-free transportation fuels. So this is a critical moment as we all gather here and take a photograph and really document and understand that this is a key step in reaching this ambition. And as the signing takes place, congratulations everyone, a round of applause. And this really does demonstrate how Kenya is prioritizing economic expansion and charting a course for the country to harness the potential of green hydrogen as a key driver of energy transition, promotion of environmental stewardship, as well as the generation of jobs. Thank you so much, Excellencies, for this very critical moment and for launching the green hydrogen strategy. I'd like to invite Mike Gitonga to take over, the head of protocol.
Thank you very much, Zain. And distinguished guests, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to have a short interlude of music as we set up the stage in preparation for the statements that are going to be made immediately after. So I'll request that we have the stage set up for the next session that we're going to have. We'll have a short interlude of music.